Hi, I'm Andrew Bryant, global expert on self-leadership and author of the new Leadership Playbook, Being Human whilst Successfully Delivering Accelerated Results. In the new Leadership Playbook, the first principle is self-leadership comes first. And in the show today, we will discuss why you need to know the difference between healthy and unhealthy ego. We explore why self-awareness comes the moment you catch your inner dialogue and you don't know what you're saying, you don't like what you're saying to yourself. And finally, we're going to be covering how to give effective feedback even when people don't want to take accountability. That and so much more. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Andrew Bryant. Andrew Bryant is the author of the new Leadership Playbook. He is a global expert on self-leadership, and he has this brand new book that is really laying out the specific conversations that need to be had and how to have them. You know, when we look at leadership, we all understand that we can't do leadership the way we've done it. However, how do we have it in a way that really is going to work, particularly when we're having those uncomfortable or, quote, difficult conversations? In part 1 of the show, we talked about the first principle is self-leadership. We talked about what that actually is and how to actually confront it so that you can become the kind of leader that you want to become, so that you can get the results that you want to get. And Andrew laid that out beautifully for us. In the second part, we want to talk about those plays inside of his playbook that Andrew talks about, which is these 12 conversations that follow around 7 principles. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So stay tuned. So we've talked about all those great things. Andrew, I want to dive into this now, these actual plays, because there are 12 conversations. I know we're not going to get into all of them in depth, but I want you to sort of cherry pick a few for us because, like I said, I think people do get confused about, well, what do I do? I don't know how to have this kind of conversation. You said one-to-one or one-to-many. What would be something you would pick out is like, okay, we really should get into this one?
Okay. Well, the first one I'm going to give you is the feedback conversation.
Yeah.
Before I do that, I just want to say how the book came about, if you don't mind.
Please.
Because leadership books, I didn't want to write another leadership book because there are lots of them and there's some great ones. However, one of my clients, Silicon Valley client, I'd worked with the CEO, the executive leadership team, and the chief people officer said, I need you to cascade this down through our organization, but I need you to make it practical. I went, yeah. And I laid some stuff out. She said, no, more practical. And I went, you're asking for a playbook, aren't you? And she said, yeah, can you do that? So I agreed to do a playbook for that organization as long as I can get the IP, which is what the new Leadership Playbook came from. And we called it a playbook because, in American football, a play is a set move.
Yes.
And it's interesting that leaders get to very high levels in organizations and are unable to have the very first conversation, the why conversation, made famous by Simon Sinek. Why is this important? I'm delegating this piece of work. Why is it important to you, to the company, to the world, etc.? People don't know how to have that conversation. And then a conversation that is typically fumbled is the feedback conversation. We give somebody a task, we delegate something, and it doesn't come back the way we wanted it to happen. Now, firstly, we need to look in the mirror and go, did we set a clear expectation? Yeah. More often than not, we didn't. We had a mental picture, and that mental picture got distorted in the way we asked for it, but nevertheless. So
none of us have ever done that in our marriages, by the way.
Oh, don't even sidetrack me on that one. So I went, okay, well, how do I teach managers, in a step-by-step play? And I think, acronyms are great. So I said, okay, we're going to do FIF: fact, impact, future, right? So, let's say you're talking to Simon and you teed Simon up to contribute in a meeting, and you were hoping that would give him some visibility for promotion, et cetera, and in the meeting, Simon is next to Simon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can be frustrated, tear your hair out, but at some point, you've got to pull Simon aside and you've got to share the fact. Simon, on Thursday, after lunch, we were in the marketing meeting. So you set the context that it's undeniable. Not, oh, somebody once said that, or I have heard from people that. No, on Thursday in the marketing meeting, I noticed, I observed, remember in our first session, everything starts with observation. I observed that you had an opportunity to speak up, contribute your ideas, and you were not speaking up.
Right.
Do you have the same memory, right? So establishing that reality for feedback is important. Otherwise, you've got denial.
So that's the fact part.
That's the fact part. So establish the fact. Then question the impact. So we fail to do this with our kids very often. We say, don't do this, don't do that, because we don't run with scissors. Well, why should you not run with scissors? What's the impact of running with scissors? Well, the impact is potentially you're going to fall over, stab your eye out with them, and we're going to spend the weekend in the hospital, right? So, and it's going to cost all the money. That's the impact, right? So, Simon, you didn't speak up in the meeting. What do you think the impact of that is? Right? Now, hopefully Simon can answer this question and say, well, my ideas are not going to be heard. I'm going to minimize my visibility and reduce my promotion possibilities. But often they don't know. Now, the temptation to tell people is always so strong, right? Because we know what's for everybody else. But feedback only really works when they have that awareness, that epiphany, like, oh, okay, that's why I'm not getting the results. And back to that self-leadership piece. Because great leadership is always not just leading yourself, but imparting that self-leadership and ownership to somebody else. When Simon gets it, he goes, oh, I missed an opportunity. Yeah, Simon. So, Simon, what could you do differently in the future? And this is where you role play. This is how, do you know how to interject your ideas into a busy conversation? Actually, I don't know. Well, then let's quickly role play that.
Yes.
Hey, I have an opinion, So fact, impact, future is very, very simple. Now, when I share this, some of your audience is already going, yeah, but what if they, don't take responsibility?
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is the difficult, what if they do blame, club play? Then you have to give feedback on people's ability to receive feedback. And this blows people's brains. It's like, right, well, I've talked to Simon and he's just in denial or whatever. You just say, hey, Simon, remember what we talked about in the meeting on Thursday after lunch, the marketing meeting, right? And I shared this and you made all these excuses. You said this, you said this, you said this. Simon, I need to give you feedback that unless you take ownership of speaking up, contributing your ideas, you are sabotaging your own career. But, I said that complaining or that denial is the problem.
I really
think about that.
I like how it's laid out this very simple formula for feedback, but I like that you've not sort of left it there, because if you leave it there, it's like, okay, we've got this play, but it doesn't allow for things to go skew-if, and they often do. And then to apply exactly the same principle, which is the feedback to the feedback. So, so here's what happened. Do you agree that that's what happened? That you say it wasn't your fault, that it was the manager who wouldn't let you speak, blah, blah, blah. Yes. Okay. What do you think the impact of that was when you said that it's not your fault? I mean, I just love the simplicity of it and the fact that it can be multi-layered. I think things that are effective don't have to change. They just can be layered. The same thing, again, again. So when I ask people about, what's your why, they'll tell me, and often it's not their why at all. And it's because they've only gone one level. And they're shocked that I'll take them 3, 5, 7, 10 levels, depending on what it is. But they're shocked to that. And it's not that I'm inventing something new. I'm saying the very same thing I said before, but it's that level of like, oh, I never thought about it that way. And that's what you're doing with this. And I just love that because it's practical. Beautiful.
Yes. Well, as I said, this book was commissioned by a client to make it practical. And I created 10 plays for that client. And then when I wrote the book for general distribution, I ended up with 12. And that's the first one, because you cannot transition from manager to leader if you cannot give feedback.
Right.
Because that feedback to a subordinate also can be feedback to a peer. I do a lot of work with executive leadership teams. I'm working with the CEO, CTO, CFO, CMO, CPO, COO, CIO, whatever, chief revenue officer. And I love that work because the executive leadership team is often the least functioning team in the whole organization, but it's the most important team because it's not operating as a team. It's operating as a work group with spokes. Each function is just a spoke to the CEO. There's no rim. There's no interdependence between them. And so when you can get very senior people like this be able to say, "Hey, John, I really like that proposal you're making. I just have some concern about the impact of," right? So you don't have to say yes, but, or I don't agree with you. You go, "Hey, that's a great idea." And, right? Straight from improv theater, never use but, always use and make your partner look good. And, I want to explore the impact. Then you can have an adult conversation about the issues and you separate the behavior from the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Right? This is the hardest thing for people. Now, I lived in Asia for 17 years and they are terrified of giving feedback because they don't want to make it about the person. They don't want somebody to lose face. The underlying principle of self-leadership is I own my thoughts, feelings, and actions, which means I can adjust them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to do things that don't work, right? But that doesn't mean it's less. I'm less of a person, right?
No.
I throw a ball at the basket, it doesn't go in, right? Well, am I a failure forever? No, I got some accurate feedback on how to throw the ball in the basket, right? I know what doesn't work, so I can make an adjustment. Now,
yes.
If nobody tells me that I'm missing the basket, if I'm blindfolded and I'm throwing that ball and nobody's telling me I'm missing, I'm going to be upset that they didn't give me the feedback.
Of course.
So when I've led teams, I've always said, if I'm giving you feedback, it's because I love and care for your development and progress. If you're hearing silence from me, that's when you want to work.
Right. Yeah. And again, this is where the ego gets in the way because we can see feedback as criticism. And this is why, as a leader, whether you're a leader of 10,000 or you're a leader of inside of your own family, the bottom line is that you have to be giving feedback in a way that it can be received. And as Richard Bandler said, the quality of your communication is the results you receive. It's not how good you think your communication was. If it wasn't received well, that's on you, even if you think you did a magnificent job. My wife and I were away last weekend. We were celebrating a silver anniversary, and it was later in the evening, and I'd been fasting, and I hadn't eaten for a long time, and it was in the 48th hour, and in 36 hours, I'm really sharp, but at 48 hours, now I'm getting into I'm a bit prickly. And I got some pretty, let's just say, less than stellar service. And my response was, "You're not understanding me." And my wife said, and the quality of your communication is the results you're getting.
Yeah.
Thank you, darling.
Beware of letting your spouse listen to your own podcasts.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah. My wife is my business partner. She's involved in the business. So she, like your wife, she can definitely call me out and stuff. But this is the key, is that we've got to be able to hear that feedback. It's important. When it comes to this, because like I said, the layering is beautiful. When it comes to these 12 conversations, is there one that, I mean, maybe is the feedback one, maybe there's another one that you constantly get feedback on as like, oh my God, I use this all the time. It's so great. Like, so that our listeners can go, okay, I could put that in it.
Yeah. Well, you actually mentioned it in the introduction. It's having the difficult conversation.
Right.
I mean, there's a whole book on difficult conversations. I've taken some of that book and some of nonviolent communication and given a very practical idea of having a difficult conversation. Before I go there, though, you've mentioned ego twice in the podcast, and I haven't responded. Can I have a moment to give my take on where ego plays in leadership?
Absolutely.
And then I promise I'll give you the difficult conversation play or some elements of it. So people use the word ego. They bandy it around. And I don't think people, I know you do, but I know the general public can get confused about what is ego.
Absolutely.
Actually, ego means sense of self. And it is important to have a healthy ego. When we talk about he has a big ego, we're actually saying he or she is actually engaging in egocentric behaviors to defend an ego, right? So when somebody, turns up at outside the hotel, revs their sports car, their Lamborghini, and throws the keys to the valet and makes sure everybody sees them, is that a big ego or a small ego? Well, it's a weak ego because it requires others to validate their sense of self. Right? If your ego is healthy, you can turn up to the hotel on a bicycle because you know who you are and you've got nothing to prove. And it is the biggest failure in leadership is when somebody has something to prove. You asked me in the first session about, when did I have my wake-up moment? I was proving something to my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Something I always say to my leaders, and I give them a mantra, and the women leaders especially love this, which is, I have nothing to prove, only things to improve. And the beauty of that is it's not hubris, I have nothing to prove, I'm perfect, because none of us are perfect because it's got that built in, only things to improve. I talked about self-leadership is about becoming the best version of yourself. Yes. I'm version 6.2, I'm better than version 6.1, I'm better than version 6.0, and boy, am I wiser than version 2.1, right?
Yes.
And so that evolution is always there. So for me, when we talk about ego, you're talking about ego defense mechanisms. When somebody can't take the feedback because it is challenging their sense of identity, which is why self-leadership comes first. We have to be comfortable with who we are and understand that we are work in progress, that we are not perfect, that we are fallible, that we will make mistakes. And with that comes the empathy to understand others are fallible and will make mistakes, right? We cannot expect of others what we can't expect of ourselves. And so we're going to constantly have the feedback conversation, not out of you screwed up, but hang on a moment, possibly on me, I didn't set out the expectations, right? I didn't necessarily match the expectations to your ability, experience, and training, right? And maybe I didn't connect my expectations to a why, a mindset that you wanted to have buy-in on this. Maybe that's the conversation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That I've missed something. Let me know what I didn't do. And there's your communication.
Yeah.
Now, if you've
I think that's a really great way for people to understand what ego is, because I'm the first to say everybody has an ego. You're not going to, people talk about killing the ego. You're never going to kill it. it helps you to survive. It's not a bad thing. It's only the bad thing if it's driving all the time and you need to put it in passenger seat. Sometimes you need to put it in the back seat. And sometimes when it's going a bit mental, you have to sort of lock it in the trunk for a while you take the road for a while. But the truth of the matter is, as you said, we all have ego, and it's understanding that a healthy ego doesn't require the validation of others. And at the same time, the ego interpretation of that from a negative point of view can be, I don't need anybody else's validation. I'm all that in a bag of chips. No, healthy ego is constantly, and as you said, it's self-leadership. Healthy ego is, there is no there. I'm always refining who I am to become the better version of myself, not than I originally was, than I was 5 seconds ago. And I love, thank you for making that nice and clear. Thank you. So let's get into those difficult conversations.
Thank you for reinforcing the point, and I love that you get it. And I knew you would get this. I think sometimes, with technical terms, I mean, ego, id, and superego come from the work of Sigmund Freud, and he was looking at the aberrations of the ego when it is driving to feed itself.
Yes.
When you've already fed yourself, right? I mean, look, if cast your mind back to when you were a single guy in a bar on a Friday night. If you were desperate, the women could smell that and they would run 100 miles, right? If you want to be flirty, you've got to be confident in yourself. You've got to be funny. You've got to be prepared to make mistakes, and the women will flock to you, right?
Mm.
So, if you're going, oh, look at me, aren't I cool? Let me tell you about how much money I make and what car I drive. The women are going to vomit, right? Well, the moment you're kind of quirky and fallible and fun, then generally that works. So,
it's interesting.
Dating advice on a leadership podcast.
Well, in the context of dating, but I would go further because I say this all the time in my work, that vulnerability is a superpower. And that vulnerability is exactly what you just described. Obviously not with a sexualized intent, but with the intent of connecting with the other person, is to show up in your own quirky vulnerability and to be willing to be playful is, actually lacks the context of we were talking about of ego. It actually completely embraces one's vulnerability and says, I can screw up and I'm going to make mistakes. And here's my quirky way of looking at it. And we can laugh about it together and we can grow together through this. So it's a great analogy you use for dating, whether you're gay or you're straight or whatever you are, because it's actually not about dating. It's about understanding that all relationships are just that. They're a relationship. And I think that oftentimes we're so nervous about having these awkward conversations that we put it in the context of like, oh my God, my life depends upon it, as opposed to, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm allowed to screw up as long as I take ownership and be playful with it rather than making it life or death.
Absolutely. You've nailed it 100%. And the reason most people can't have these conversations is, I've surveyed people over the years on this one, and, the number one reason I didn't give feedback is I didn't want to hurt their feelings. Or the number two reason is I don't want repercussions if they don't like the feedback that I gave them. I'm like, well, neither of those two arguments are actually valid. If you give feedback accurately, it's about their behaviors. It's not about them.
Right.
And, if you're worried about repercussions, the power dynamic, we need to examine the system and the context.
Mm-hmm.
So I promised to give you the play on difficult conversations, and I want to hold my accountability. I'm not watching the clock. I'm sure you are, but I want to give that, and then we can go anywhere you want. So, I know we've done, we've talked about the why, which is a very positive play. You've talked about that, and I know you've talked about that in previous sessions. So I didn't want to go there. I'm picking on two kind of remedial things, but they really cut to the heart of the practicality. So fact, impact, future, feedback, but then they don't change their behavior, right? You've given it to them. They know the impact. They know the implications. You've articulated the future behavior. It doesn't happen. What the hell do you do? Well, you have to have a difficult conversation. And the metaphor I have for that is put the fish on the table. And I learned this, it's a Southern European, possibly Southern Italian expression. If the fish is under the table, it's going to rot, it's going to smell, it's going to stink. If we put the fish on the table, we can cook that fish, couldn't cook the table, cook that fish, and we'll eat it on the table. Now, this, so many of the leaders and leadership teams I've coached, they tell me they use this all the time. And they preface it once it's out in the open. They say, we need to have a fish on the table conversation, right? It's going to say, there's going to be an issue. We're going to need to look at this as an issue. Now, by visualizing it as a fish, we've externalized it from ego and we put it out there. This is a fish on the table. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the fish.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that stinky fish might be your inability to take feedback.
Right.
But we're talking about an object rather than attacking an individual. As long as we can do that, there's still an opportunity for the individual to wake up and go, oh my God, I have to take ownership and responsibility of this. And it always comes back to this, in that conversation of, hey, this is within your area of responsibility. My conversation to you is my accountability.
Yes.
Now, this distinction between responsibility for and accountability to is a distinction that a lot of people get confused. I mean, people have racy matrices around, who is responsible, who is accountable, who is a controller, etc. I draw it this way. In our conversation, you and I, Dov, right now, I have a responsibility for my thinking, my feeling, my words, my actions. You're a grown adult. I am not responsible for you. If you lose it, if you have been fasting for 48 hours and you get hangry, that's on you, buddy. It's not on me. I don't have any ownership. However, I have an accountability to you. Your team sent out an email and said, turn up at this time. I turned up a couple of minutes early because I have an accountability to the contracts I make. We talked about relationships, right? I'm married to a strong woman. Sounds like you are too. I'm not responsible for my wife. She can be responsible for herself. She's intelligent. She's powerful. She's beautiful. But I have an accountability to her, which means that we have a huge level of trust in our relationship, and vice versa. I trust her because we understand what those accountabilities are. So when we are having a difficult conversation, it comes down to whether we reframed, people already had heard from us, this is what you're responsible for, looking after your thinking, your feeling, your actions, your emotions. The way you turn up is totally within your ownership. The accountability piece is, this is the way we behave in this culture, in this team, on this project, towards these values. So if somebody breaches the accountability piece, the conversation is going to be a Jim Collins conversation, get the right people on the bus, get the wrong people off the bus. If their values are not, in terms of driving their behaviors, are not in alignment, that's a conversation that is going to end very quickly. It's, you're not a great fit for this team, wish you well, but, clean up your desk and security will see you to the door. That conversation is unequivocal. And anybody who's ever delayed that conversation, and people typically delay that conversation about 6 months, always say, I wish I had that conversation 6 months ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, every time. It's fascinating to me how, like you, I'm working with these executive teams, I'm working with these companies, and I'm like, you got to get rid of her. You got to get rid of him. And they're like, oh, but they've got so much potential. And I always say, potential is a lie. And they go, what do you mean potential is a lie? Potential is a lie if that person isn't fulfilling it. It's what you hope for in them. But I've seen this good in them. Yeah, that's great. I'm sure, Adolf Hitler loved animals. I'm not going to take that as potential to let my kids hang out with him. It's just like, nah, I don't think so. Potential doesn't matter. What matters is the fulfillment of the potential. And I think that oftentimes we buy into potential rather than looking at the responsibility, the accountability, and the willingness to have that difficult conversation, which is our responsibility if we're accountable to what this organization is about. And that's why I love what you're saying about that. That's why I think that's such an important question. The conversation is, what is the fish that smells so bad that we're all pretending is fine? We all keep bringing our little air fresheners with us and telling it everything's fine. You know, I can only smell apples and cinnamon. No, that's the shit you're using to pollute the actuality. And the actuality is there's a stinky fish here. Let's deal with that.
Yep. So just that conversation and role-playing how to have that conversation has transformed some teams that I've worked with many actually. And they love it. You know, having the fish on the table conversation, people love to have that because it's given them permission to have a conversation that they haven't previously had. To your point on potential, I love what you've said about potential. And I think, you know, the key here is you can see the potential, but if they haven't owned that potential, it's not yet potential. And this is the magical part about being a leader or a coach or a facilitator or just a human being is when you see that potential and you light the spark and they get it and they go, really? I can do that? Mm-hmm. Wow. Thank you. And then you see them do it. You know, you asked me, you know, how did I get started? And it was seeing that potential. What keeps me going is continuing to see that potential. When I can see in somebody, you could do this, but I know I can't do it for them. I only know I can kind of light the fuse. And if they take ownership, then the fireworks, just like the background that you've got behind you there. And I love that with the fireworks you've got happening there. That's where the fireworks happen. And that's when you know you're a leader because you've lit that spark of ownership, accountability in somebody else. And then they're off chasing their own objectives. Now, if those objectives are, you know, help you and your team to move towards there, then that's an exciting team to be part of.
Absolutely. Well, Andrew, we are very, very close to the end of part 2 of the show. It's been a pleasure and a joy to have you on. Thank you for that. As we come to the end here, you know, I know that I have people or organizations that I just love working with. What kind of people or what kind of organizations do you just like salivate at the potential of working with them?
It's always easiest to work from the top down, as you know, right? Yeah. If you get brought into an organization and HR calls you up and said, I need you to work with these middle managers to do ownership and accountability, and you go, well, can I talk to the senior leaders? Oh, no, they don't think they need it. You know that you're going to take a paycheck, but you're not going to make any difference.
Yeah.
So that clearly, when I was putting my kids through school in Singapore, you know, I had to take that work to pay the school fees, but I hated it. Now at version 6.2, living in Portugal with lower cost of living than Singapore, I get to choose it. And I got a call earlier this year from a guy. I coached him as a managing director of a software company in Asia. He's a Dutch guy. The company he was working for got bought out by one of the biggies, 3 letters. And he got taken to America, hated the new culture, retired, got pulled out of retirement to be a CEO. And he gave me a call and said, hey, Andrew, I'm putting a new team together. All right. And I need you to come and set the ground rules from the get-go. I need them to operate with one voice. And I'm like, oh, that's lovely. He said, oh, by the way, could you do it the day before the board meeting so that they operate as one team? And I went, no. You know, I'm good, but I'm not that good. And so, you know, I got to meet them. I got to meet them a month before, and we got to do some work. And he, as a leader, is incredible driven as far as sales for the organization, but he's incredibly vulnerable. He has his own personal story of loss and challenge, and he's able to share that with his team and say, "Hey, this is what I've been carrying," and that gives them the permission. And you know, everybody is carrying their bag. You asked me about my story, the medical challenge, and I'm like, my story ends well. But so many people, are carrying burdens. They're looking after loved ones, or they're single parents have been there and done that too, right? Everybody's carrying something.
Yes.
And yet some of the best performers still step up over and above that. They don't make an excuse. They use that as a reason, as a purpose. So working with organizations where the leader is prepared to be vulnerable and prepared to ask for help, right? They know they can't do it all. They've got so many plates spinning. It's an absolute joy to work with. And I think you probably agree with me that is...
Well, that's one of the reasons I wanted to ask you, because I was pretty sure that your answer would be pretty much lockstep with what mine would have been too, especially if it's a new team of people who are coming into Stats, where it's like, oh, this is so exciting because we can get everybody on the same page right from the start, as opposed to let's undo all the shitty behaviors and try and fix that before we can get everybody in alignment. It's like, oh no, this is so much better. I figured that would be true. Thank you.
Yeah.
So as we're closing, I really want to thank you for being with us, and thank you for all that you've shared. Again, I really appreciate it if you could tell people where they can find out more about you, about the book, about where they can find out about that, and any other things you want to share about resources.
Sure. Well, as I said, the easiest place to find me is selfleadership.com. Pretty much all the links are there. And if you flossing around, there's actually you can download a free chapter of the book. Easiest way to find it, I think, is thenewleadershipplaybook.com. Download the first chapter, have a read, take a look at the ice cream. If you like the way I write, think it makes sense, then by all means, buy the book. If you think your organization needs some help, I'm a gun for hire. I'm jumping on a plane. I've got the next couple of weeks is interesting. I'm off to Dubai, then I'm off to Romania, then I'm off to Iceland, then I'm off to Norway. I only need to do Denmark, and I've collected the whole Nordic set, by the way. So I'm looking for somebody to hire me in Denmark at the moment. So, look, I'm very grateful that I have reached a point in my career where I'm good at what I do, and I get to do work that matters with people who are prepared to pay me for what I do. That is my ikigai, and I'm very grateful that I found the sweet spot.
Beautiful. And of course, we'll make sure that we post all the links in the show notes, including the social media links for LinkedIn and for Twitter and for Facebook, etc., and even Instagram. They'll all be there in the show notes, so if you didn't catch it, we'll make sure they're there. Again, thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure and honor, sir. And for you, dear listener, remember, those who control the meaning for the tribe also control the movement of the tribe. Business and political leaders committed to positively shaping the landscape know they must tap into what drives human behavior. And you can tap into that groundbreaking understanding by understanding the anatomy and meaning extracted from the emotional source code. I'm Dov Barron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe. Because unified actualized meaning, the single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about the quality of conversations you have in the leadership role. Maybe you need a new playbook. And this, as you've discovered today, there is a new playbook for leadership. And it starts with the first principle, leadership of self. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you, tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.